My name is Roy Veterano. I'm a member of the 04 class. And I'm introducing this session, New Models in Healthcare Delivery and Therapeutics, and Bunny Ellerin, who's Director of Healthcare and Pharmaceutical Management, the program that is at Columbia Business School. Bunny and I have been acquainted, been partners to some extent on the board for the last 2 years, and really fortuitous how I met her and how I ended up being invited to join. And all I can do is attest that coming back to Columbia Business School is wonderful every time I do. It's got that special, deep place in my heart, and I think in every one of our hearts, for what it taught me. But what I learn as I get older, that it still has a lot to teach us. That's really the bonus gift that I just am always amazed by, that there's just a lot more still left to be learned here. And working with Bunny is just what has been one of the great accelerators of that, facilitators of that for me personally. Because I've gotten to watch her work at the school, and as modest and humble as she is, she hates every second of this speech right now, I know her. I'm just going to say it anyway, which is why I have the mic. She is 100% committed to the betterment of our healthcare program at the school. She takes no prisoners, she compromises absolutely nothing. She's absolutely militant about execution. And my favorite part of all is that she leaves room for the lunatics like me and other peers like me on the board to come up with those crazy, wacky ideas that actually end up happening at this school, which is just so rare. So just from a philanthropic standpoint alone, I think each of us at certain points in our life have a little bit more time, resources, and inclination to do philanthropic work. You look for that anywhere, regardless of whether it's a school that you happen to have gone to as a student. But the fact that it exists here and it exists in healthcare, which is an industry that is so important and so dear to our hearts, is just so special. So, fine to hear you.
Thank you. You get a hug. Thank you so much, Roy. That was really very, very sweet of you. And so I came to Columbia Business School about 2.5 years ago after a long career in the healthcare industry. And believe me, if anybody had told me I'd be working at a business school at this point in my life, I would have laughed at them. However, I can actually say that over the past 2.5 years, hands down, this has been one of the best experiences of my life. I've enjoyed every minute of it. The students at Columbia Business School are phenomenal. I mean, I'm a jaded healthcare person after 25 years, and I tell them all the time they give me hope every day that our system is going in the right direction. And so to that end, I just wanted to ask, how many of you actually work in healthcare? All right, so really, and how many of you don't? All right, great. So what I always say is we're all patients, right? So we're all in the healthcare system. We all intersect with healthcare. What I'm trying to do at the business school is really grow the healthcare management discipline, the program. It's in good shape. We're almost 15 years old. We've got a great range of courses, but this past year in particular has just been a phenomenal year for us. And so I just wanted to give you a little glimpse into why that is and why Roy was talking about philanthropy. Number one, there's a huge network of Columbia Business School alumni in healthcare, and healthcare we look at as 18% of the economy, so all sectors. So this year we launched, or last year we launched a mentor program. We're coming on our second annual term, and we already have like 60 mentors who have volunteered to mentor first and second year students. We launched a strategic plan, and a big part of that is cross-Columbia collaboration, meaning the business school is in a phenomenal place to be sort of the convener, but we're not the only game in town, right? Healthcare is a business, but in order for us to thrive, we've got to work with the rest of Columbia's schools. And so to that end, as Roy was saying about his wacky ideas, one of the wacky ideas was we should launch a lecture series. And I'm like, healthcare has a lot of lecture series, okay? But there's no place like Columbia where you can actually bridge theory and practice and bring a lot of really important stakeholders together. So We've done that already, and to that end, for any of you in New York, I've got flyers and it's on the website, April 16th, we're hosting our first real cross-Columbia event called The Complex World of Drug Pricing. One of our panelists is going to be Tracy Bahl, but we already have 140 people signed up. So there's a lot of interest in it, and I'm excited about that. And finally, probably the biggest news of the past year is that healthcare, for the first time ever, got an endowed gift. At a university, that's your currency, right? That's the name of the game. And I tell everyone that our vision is to become center for healthcare transformation at Columbia Business School. This first endowed gift is incredibly meaningful, and it absolutely puts us on the right course. It's from somebody named Tom DeRosa, who's the CEO of Welltower. One of our panelists is also at Welltower. And so Tom's made a real commitment. And so to start us off, I know I've talked a little long, but I wanted to show you a video. We engage with industry in New York City and beyond. We are the nexus of healthcare at Columbia Business School.
Having a healthcare curriculum at Columbia Business School was one of the main reasons I came to Columbia. I really loved the ability of the school to bring in professionals from the community and being able to go to their classes and learn from them in a real-world environment.
I knew I wanted to focus on healthcare, and I knew, I wanted a real intersection between business and healthcare across all disciplines.
Coming to CBS, the healthcare component was the #1 factor in my decision making. Really wanted to go to a school that had many healthcare classes, also had a vast alumni network focused on healthcare, and had those opportunities to do internships in healthcare in New York City.
Columbia is in a unique situation. We have a world-class business school, we have a world-class medical school, we have a world-class school of public health, and I think that the business school, working with those and other parts of the university, has an opportunity to really create a hub of healthcare information and knowledge that is unsurpassed in the country and maybe even in the world.
I found out about the endowed gift on June 21st. I remember the day because it's the day my son graduated from middle school and he won the English award, which I thought would be the big news of the day. And then I got a call from Tom DeRosa, and Tom said, "Honey, I just signed the papers. I am making an endowed gift to your program." And I was stunned.
This gift was amazing because it's going to really allow us to do some of those great things in terms of research, in terms of bringing people to campus, having more offerings for future students. So yeah, I was thrilled because it's going to really be kind of a transformative gift for this program.
I think it's incredibly exciting. I think it's an incredibly generous gift, and I think the healthcare department will benefit from it tremendously. I know they have staff and faculty that work extremely hard to bring really interesting content and speakers and classes, and this will allow them to do that and allow it to grow and really become sort of the preeminent healthcare department in a business school.
The endowed gift, as a student that came in interested in healthcare, is really exciting because I think that Columbia really has the opportunity to kind of like place themselves at the center of healthcare business.
I want Columbia's healthcare and pharmaceutical management program to be known at the same level that Columbia is known for value investing, Columbia is known for PE and its strength in finance, and I want Columbia healthcare to be at that level and spoken with in the same regard.
Getting an endowed gift is transformational for healthcare. We are a program today. I came to Columbia to build a center. The fact that the gift comes from Tom DeRosa is meaningful because he's a leader, he's visionary, he understands healthcare, and it signals to others that healthcare will be a major force at Columbia Business School.
Thank you, Tom!
Now we get started. And so we've got 4 phenomenal panelists who represent all facets of healthcare. So it's, and that's very intentional because we want to talk about healthcare in a broad way. And so what I was going to ask is for each of you to introduce yourselves, briefly and give a little bit of background on what you're doing now, why you're here, and then we will launch right into the Q&A. And how fortuitous, that's sitting right next to me is Shankh from Welltower. So, Shankh, go for it.
Thank you, Bunny. It's really great to be back here. I was taking a walk around the school, walking down the memory lane. I was here, I see some of my classmates. I graduated in 2009. I was a peer advisor 2 or 3 times. I was in the Columbia's Value Investing Program. I've not done much healthcare when I was here, except my year, Bob Esner did a whole series, and just after he sold Wyeth and he was the executive resident, that's the only healthcare class I took. But background, I'm sort of an investor for life. Majority of my professional life, I worked for hedge funds and managed money, and I never thought I'll ever have a real job, let alone in a complex industry like healthcare. Tom DeRosa, who you all saw, I'm his right hand. He came to me, I was an investor in his company 4 years ago, and said, how do you like to come and run a company and learn how to do that and turn around a company? So I said, that kind of sounds really interesting, but I don't know how to do that. So he said, we'll just do it together, we'll just learn, and that's why I did that. I left my money management job and thought I'll try it for 12 months, and didn't work out. I'll come back, and since then never looked back. It's been a great experience. I'll just give you a quick 2 seconds on what we do. Welltower is the 3rd largest publicly traded real estate company in the world, about $45 billion of enterprise value. We generally do 2 types of businesses. One is seniors housing, all things seniors. So the reason I'm on this panel is aging. That's a topic that is near and dear to our heart. Healthcare is sort of a more loaded word for us. We're more focused on health and wellness. So we'll talk about how we keep seniors well, and that's sort of the part of our mission and part of our name. The other side of our business is we're the largest owner of outpatient infrastructure in this country. 25 million square feet. We own across the board with different health systems. As one of my colleagues is sitting here in the panel, we work with the likes of the New York Presbyterians and Jeffersons and Providence St. Joe's of the world. What we do, try to optimize the infrastructure and think about the patient flow, and we have probably about 20 million plus patients go through it. So my job is we have, as Tom brought me over to turn around his company, as he says, we took a step back and thought about what is our asset. We thought about where real estate company, real estate is our asset. Then we progressed and thought about the lives who live in these assets and who go through these assets. That's our assets. That's the data that comes through it. So we built a huge data analytics group in this company, and a life that you'll never see in a real estate company. So that's my background. It's a hodgepodge of everything. I probably know less about healthcare than about any of you. My passion is aging, and my passion is health and wellness, and less about the care.
Okay.
It's interesting. I listen to everyone here. I'm curious why I'm here, because I'm basically unemployed. And everyone has a very formidable
I could
job.
use an assistant.
So yeah, I might sign up for it. I had the good fortune of starting a company in the last 5 years that very quickly got sold for a substantial amount of money, and it was good in a lot of ways, but it has forced me to re-examine my next entrepreneurial things, and I think that might be why I'm on the panel, because I'm an innovator. I've been an entrepreneur for 20, almost 30 years in pharmaceuticals and a little bit of devices, but mostly in the drug business. So I think about how I can take innovation through the development process, financing, development, and try to get it through to some next level of value. And I think about it from a financial perspective, and also obviously from a clinical perspective. So I'm an MD. I went to medical school and did a couple of years after medical school in surgery, and then I ended up getting an MBA at Columbia, and that was in the early 90s. And I did similar things as you, and I was an analyst for several years, which was a real compliment to being an innovator, because I got a real good sense of how this industry operates. I was an analyst at a big firm, Alliance Capital. That was right after Columbia. But so I've started a few companies, one of which didn't work out for us financially, but turned out to produce about $2.5 billion a year in revenue. It became the standard of care in certain types of hemophilia. But from that, it allowed me to start another company that in the midst of a very buoyant economy and the wind at everyone's back in biopharmaceuticals, and probably why this room is more busy than it would have been 10 years ago. We enjoyed a path of rapid value creation, et cetera. So that's basically me, and thanks for having me back. And
I think I'm getting a sense of what you do when you're bored. I'm a doctor, I'm bored. I'll get an MBA, I'll start a company and make a bunch of money. I'm bored. I'll invent something that revolutionizes hemophilia. What the hell have I been doing for? I'm Tracy Bahl. I am currently president and CEO of a company called OneOncology, which is in the community oncology space. We're a network of what we think are some of the leading community-based oncology practices in the country, powered by a technology platform as well as a significant data and analytics orientation. I've been in healthcare services my whole life. I actually started as a cardiac tech 100 years ago. I found my way into managed healthcare, where I started with Cigna, managing health plans, including the health plan here in New York, for about 8 years. Then spent a decade at United Health Group, where I finished as CEO of one of the operating units there called Uniprise, which consisted of the technology operations, the infrastructure, claim processing, call centers, our international business, our national account business, and a lot of our early stage development companies. It's a lot of fun. I spent 6 years after that at a private equity firm in New York, here in New York called General Atlantic, where I was an operating partner, involved in a number of different investments, including 3 years as executive chairman of a company called MDI, which later became Change Healthcare. And then went to CVS Health, where I was until just recently, where I led the payer division for about 5 years, and had a lot of fun there learning the PBM business. I think I left there just in time. If you're following those stocks the last couple of days. And rejoined General Atlantic to launch OneOncology just 6 months ago. And just came back from our first big oncology conference in Orlando actually this morning, and we're off and running. We'll talk more about it later, but it's really fun. I know nothing about oncology nor practice management, so I'm wondering how the hell I got that job, but I'm making it until I fake it. Fake it till I make it. So.
You can become my assistant after that.
That's, yeah, sure.
I'm Chris Langan. I'm a Texan. I'm from Houston currently, but actually grew up in New York City area. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I trained at Mount Sinai, so I was here for a long time, and had an opportunity to go out to a system called Memorial Hermann in Houston. It's actually one of the biggest employers in the area, about $6 billion in revenue per year. Originally, I was actually with a company called Team Health. It was a for-profit company at the time. Now it's owned by Blackstone, and we supplied all the physicians for the entire system. I ran all the emergency departments. Did a good job at that, so Memorial Hermann asked me to come on as Chief Medical Officer, so I've been doing that for over 4 years, and I'm in charge of the North Hospitals and Healthcare. What does a Chief Medical Officer do? We're responsible for patient quality and safety. And with that comes financial responsibility. It was actually funny. So I graduated 2009 as well, and I studied a lot of value investing. Thought I would go into some type of investment banking along with medicine. But in 2009, I think half of my classmates didn't have jobs because the market collapsed. So I found myself more on the administrative end, but I really, really enjoyed it. So it was actually fortuitous, and I'll probably be in Texas for a while, so it's a great place.
Is that a good thing?
I love it. Do miss New York, so I love to travel back. I'm on the healthcare advisory board as well, and one of the great things, all my family's here, so any excuse to fly back, I'll take it.
So we have, as all sectors really, represented here. Everybody, there was a specific reason why you're on this panel, and obviously there are a lot of people in the room who are not in healthcare day to day. They're not in the thick of it, or health, the way that we are. But clearly there's a lot of interest, right? It's 18% of the economy. Anybody who looks at the news, there are a lot of different topics that come up every single day. It just seems to be going up and up. And so I kind of wanted to set the stage in terms of where we are today and kind of what are the big forces that are driving where healthcare is going to go. So when you all come back for your, in 20 years, right, for the next reunion, what will healthcare somewhat look like, and kind of what are the big trends that people should be looking for?
Coming back on April 16th for your event.
What?
We're coming back on April 16th.
Right. Oh, that's true. It won't change that much between now and then, but it might. You never know. So I don't know. Why don't we start with you, Chris?
So yeah, I was actually thinking about that. So 10 years ago, Medicare, as we're looking at aging population, so that was about 400 billion of the healthcare expense. Now it actually went up to 700 billion this past year. 10 years from now, they're projecting that it's going to be 1.3 trillion. And just to put things in perspective, we spend about 3.5 trillion per year currently on healthcare. So as a hospital administrator, Medicare is actually pretty scary, because if you wanted me to run a hospital just on Medicare, I wouldn't be able to do it. So every dollar that we bill for Medicare, we get about 25 cents back. Every dollar that we bill for managed care, so like a Blue Cross patient, we get 40 cents back. So we need a really good payer mix in order to be profitable. And as you see, some of the hospitals that, when I was training, have closed, especially kind of in the New York City area over the years. So the real way of survival has actually become Medicare profitable. And same thing too with all the managed care companies, they're following suit with that. So we're going to have this aging population. So unless we're very efficient with our care and also prevent readmissions, prevent patients from getting catastrophically ill, we're going to be in trouble, because we can't sustain that amount of Medicare spending. And again, the private companies follow suit. So it's going to get closer and closer that the Blue Crosses are going to say, well, I'm going to only pay you the Medicare rate for services. And we may see, we talk about like a nationalized Medicare, right? That's kind of the question, is that going to happen? If Democrats win the election, I think it will get pushed. And we're going to have to be very, very efficient, especially on the acute care end. Not only that, also on the pharmaceutical end.
So what are you doing at Memorial on this issue?
So we have a big effort around care redesign. So we're looking at all of our processes, how patients get ill, and really cutting out the waste. We do actually a lot with case management. When a patient comes in, we try to identify how they're going to get out of the hospital as soon as possible and have the discharge plan for them. But we really look at the heavy-hitting diseases like congestive heart failure, COPD, and then also some of our more complex cases in the ICU, and go through steps of how to get them out. So, for example, if you go in for coronary bypass surgery, you used to stay like a long time. You'd be in the hospital for 12 days. They want patients out in like 4 to 5 days if possible now. Same thing with so if you had your hip replaced back when I started training, you'd be in there for a week. Now they're doing same-day hip replacements. So you are in and out. So for me, that actually hurts. So we're doing this more efficiently, but now I only get an observation stay paid by Medicare, and I have to provide this hip implant, which is very expensive. Whereas if they're an inpatient stay, it's multiple higher because it's a higher complexity. So we're taking revenue hits by getting more efficient too. So it's going to be difficult to cover.
So for those of you who are not in day-to-day minutia of healthcare, this is one scintilla of what we go through in terms of incentives that don't always drive the right behaviors and payment mechanisms, and they are for Tracy. Yeah. You are the king of that.
Well, I think there's something underlying all of what we just discussed, including payment mechanisms. And there are always macro factors working on healthcare. They just vary in degree from time to time, right? There's always a legislative and regulatory policy pressure on healthcare. You just can't avoid it. There's always a aging influence, at least in our lifetimes here, on healthcare, and that's something we'll always face. But I don't know if anybody reads Fierce Health. It's a sort of a health publication, news, email thing. And they did this thing. They did March Madness buzzwords. You want to see that? Where they did all the buzzwords in our industry, and they matched off. Again, they had 64 buzzwords, and they matched off to the final four. And I think the two left are big data versus value proposition. So, at the risk of using one of the most overused buzzwords, I really think data is becoming a powerful influence on virtually everything we do in healthcare. And it became so pronounced in my last 6 months in the oncology space. Just seeing the power that data is unleashing, if you will, on world-class doctors and on really smart people who know how to use it. Now, data's been around us in healthcare for a while. Sometimes it was a struggle to get it. Sometimes it was a struggle to rationalize it and make it of use, to find some utility in it. Sometimes we have tons of data but not much information. I'll tell you that the clinical data now derived from EMRs is real, and it's really powerful. The ability for us to use technology to rationalize it, standardize it, and make it of use is significantly greater than it's ever been. And then the really smart people that do really cool stuff with data around really meaningful problems in healthcare are abundant. A number of them come from this school, but they're all over the place, and it's really, really impressive. So I think of two examples in oncology. One is the area of clinical trials. Now think about first, data is actually driving the pace of innovation in medicine, which is driving the increase in trial demand. We are now very close to a point where the number of trials will exceed the number of participants we have available to fund them, right? So finding trial participants, which used to be the other way around, right? It used to be doctors would have patients, they tried everything, and were dying to get them into a trial, but didn't know where they were, didn't have access to them, didn't know how to find them. We have technology now that sits on top of our EMR. It trolls the it uses the patient's electronic medical record data. It has all of the criteria for qualification into a clinical trial. And it finds a patient that has these indicators and trolls all of the clinical trials until it finds one that matches. And if there's a match, now it might be something in Sweden or it might be something in Brazil, but if there's a match, we now have the ability to pair a patient with a trial. It's a great thing for that patient. It's a great thing for that doctor. It's a great thing for the advancement of that science. In the past, we had to hunt around and use relationships, or sometimes just only known in an academic institution, of which there were only a few. One big one here, Memorial Sloan. If you were there, maybe you had a shot at getting into a trial. But if you were being treated in rural Tennessee, the chances were slim. Second is the ability of oncologists, just in my little part of the world, to, you call it precision medicine, call it between genomics and the advancements of drugs and the mechanisms through which drugs can be delivered, including CAR T therapy, where we're sort of spinning stuff up, putting it back into the body and destroying cancer. The pace of that innovation around that kind of medication is, now there are cost implications that are subject of a fascinating panel that'll be in 2 weeks on April 16th. But that's like the fourth plug bet.
I know, right?
Yeah. We're gonna need a bigger room.
We actually got a bigger room.
We got it. That's what I'm talking about. So I think, data's always been a part of it, and I don't want to use over big data, machine learning, and so forth. There's a lot of that involved. But the accessibility and the utility of it is really, really powerful.
So Laura, what about you?
Yeah, a couple things. I was fascinated. This is just a tangent when you talk about the electronic medical record. As someone that's an innovator and thinking about getting financing for a new drug, one of the things we try to do as early as possible is try to get access to those data sets to try to figure out whether our development path is actually even doable in the first place, which is a process I just went through with our last venture. But so I'm in that segment which is driving the identification and development of these innovations that these systems have to digest and figure out how to pay for and adopt into their treatment. So what's really fascinated me is that as I flash back to the mid-2000s, the trial demand was really low, and a lot of that had a lot to do with this macro risk tolerant environment. We are in a stars and moon lined up financial environment, which is stoking the fire of innovation. The venture capitalists are enjoying an unprecedented run of returns, not what they were enjoying a decade ago. It's completely flip-flopped. So they were running out of money in 2007, 2008. Now they're all getting re-upped again, and there's an enormous amount of capital chasing a lot of ideas. I'm trying to get a new company started, and there is so much innovation because the amount of biology that's getting unraveled. We are in a golden age of biology where we're not just sort of binding and grinding, if anyone knows what that means, if anyone took early chemistry or biology courses. We're doing it very rationally. The magical box of the biology is starting to open up. So we're seeing a lot of details in terms of how things work, so that there's a lot of innovation going on, but the capital markets, private and public, are really, really healthy, which are creating all of the innovation that these folks are starting to consume and have to deal with the pricing. And the flip side is that if I, as an innovator, all of a sudden found out that I can't, or I'm not going to get rewarded at the end because there's been a dramatic change in pricing, I can't raise money for my next activity. So it's all intertwined, and I think that I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen even a year from now. I feel like this has gone on too long, and it's been too robust. I'm sort of waiting because I've been around biotech long enough that these kind of durable, buoyant environments just don't last. So I'm just sort of waiting for it to kind of something macro. National debt overwhelms the system, and we are totally risk adverse. I don't know what it's going to be, but anyway, so things are going very, very well, and that's driving all the innovation and my ability to raise capital and,
Well, yes, so to your point, in 2018, $30 billion was invested in healthcare across all enterprises. This past quarter, digital health, which has been, pretty bubbling up and up and up, is down. I don't know what the number is for biotech. I think it's actually, from what I read, it's actually going pretty well still.
It's phenomenal.
Right? So what kinds of companies are being funded, so people know?
Yeah, so oncology is a big area, although it kind of got overdone a bit, but there are some hot areas within oncology. Everybody is over-chasing cellular therapy and gene therapy, and probably over-chasing it. There's probably going to be some radical innovation that thinks about cancer much different than these models of immuno-oncology, which is a big buzzword. But it's most of the innovation is not in congestive heart failure, in the big market indications. Everybody wants to figure out a high-priced, narrow market innovation for a relatively small group of patients that they can charge $100,000 to $1 million a year for. That's where all the activity is. So, I think there is a discipline that, we're not having, the funders are very sensitive to anything Me Too. I think they're a little bit irrational, over chasing, like a herd, things that get overhyped. You can see it going on in oncology right now, and Roche just paid $5 billion for a gene therapy company. I'm not sure if it really was worth that much, but you couldn't sell gene therapy 5 years ago. Nobody thought it was going to amount to anything. So But I do think that if you're really market-driven, so all these concepts you learned in business school about thinking about where the disruption is and how you're going to really improve care, and it's value to the patient more than the price. Price is important, cost is important, but if you're really going to change outcome and make patients better than compared to what they had, the system's going to figure out a way to pay for that. That's the key.
So one obviously that impact, all of this impacts what you're doing at Welltower, right? In terms of the aging population and how you're trying. And Tom and you talk a lot about keeping people well and talking about wellness and not about sickness. So what are some of the things that you're doing, in your organization?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to where Chris sort of ended. Think about today the incentives are, in a way that you need to get the patients out as quickly as you can. But then what happens? Right? So we got to think about healthcare. I think you asked that question, what's going to happen in healthcare in 10 years? I think providers are changing. Providers are thinking about, all sorts of, should I be in the sort of the payvider, if you will, right? Also, that's sort of one business model. Some people have done it extraordinarily well, like UPMC, others not so much. So that's sort of one aspect that's going on. But let's just take a step back and think about sort of the non-sexy part of healthcare. In last 4 years of our life is where you spend majority of the healthcare dollars, right? So that's where that patient, we talk about all the innovation, how do we fix the problem? But that's, Chris said, I get this patient out, where does this patient go? So we need to think about healthcare, and it will happen as the society ages very quickly. Not just healthcare dollars, also social dollars, right? So the social determinants of health will be a very important part of the conversation very quickly, is how do we keep people, healthy so that they don't visit as frequently, or when they go back after Chris let this person go, they don't come back quickly, because if it does, he or she, he's not going to get paid. So what's going to happen, right? So you will see, my prediction is you will see some shrinkage of providers, right? This dynamic of, where the dollar was and the government is taking away that dollar, it's going to be hard for provider, and it is already hard today. And so what that will obviously focus in, obviously there will be winners and losers, and people like Hermann will be winners. But specialty-wise, consumerism healthcare is real. So today, if you think about, if I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, right? If you have money and you have cancer, which is despite the fact that University of Michigan is one of the best systems, you will not get treated there, you'll get treated here, right? So that's the consumerism of healthcare. You're going to come here and you get treated if you have money. The question is, I want to talk about the people who don't, right? So what's going to happen is social determinants of health, housing, how you keep people happy, in these settings, whether they're traditional houses and how those will be worded using technology, will become a very important part, and how the physicians will interact with their patients. If you just think about what last year, Kaiser has made 37 e-visits. Changing. Kaiser is the biggest, obviously the biggest correlate in the business, but think about the dynamic is changing. That will become important. Consumerism, healthcare, social determinants of health will become extraordinarily important, particularly as this aging society will be in our face. So that there will be so much dollars chasing the innovation, as we are talking about here, always be, but the less sexy part of healthcare will be on your face, whether you like it or not, in 10 years.
So let's talk about where we'll be treated, because people have said that hospitals won't be. The current hospital complex, industrial complex that we see today will change pretty dramatically. People want to be treated at home, and obviously you do, most of the time you do better when you're in a place that you're comfortable with. So how's that going to impact what you're doing, what everybody's doing? Where do you think we're going to be treated in the next 10 to 20 years?
First, yeah. That's actually a great question. I think telehealth has come a long, long way. My wife actually, she broke her leg a few weeks ago, had to have surgery, like 3-hour operation. And she's a psychiatrist, right? So she has all of her patients. But fortunately for her, she actually has a telehealth platform. She changed them all to telehealth visits until she's better. All the patients were fine with it.
I love that.
She's seeing patients from home. The thing with the readmissions is what we really worry about. So it's really about patients that can't, that we're worried about if they're going to afford their medications. We're worried about if they're going to be able to afford coming back to get a visit. We're starting a program actually with Uber Health. So Uber is going to actually come and take these high-risk patients and bring them back into the clinic. And we're really looking, we have a big push for telemedicine for follow-up because although, you know, patients, some may not be able to afford basic things, a lot of them have a cell phone. And with these apps, for example, my wife can see her patients, they can see her on her cell phone. So I think it will get to there. And we're even willing to provide equipment for those patients because they cost us so much when they come back for readmission. If they come back and get put on a ventilator, right, for congestive heart failure, it's like a $100,000 visit right now. And we're probably going to eat a lot of that cost. So we'd be happy to give them tablets, any type of equipment that they need in order to prevent them from coming back. We're going to pay for their rides and make sure they get back to the clinic.
So is that because, in terms of how you're reimbursed for that, is that like a DRG or is that Medicare Advantage or?
Yeah, so it's DRG. So you'll get
So can you
nightmare.
explain what that is for people who don't know?
So DRGs, you actually just get a fee for what the diagnosis is, right? So you'll code your chart, and so if they come in with, I'm going to use congestive heart failure again, you'll get one fee. So I'll tell you about a nightmare that we had recently. So we had a patient that he had a tracheostomy and weighed about 560 pounds, right? So, and he has health insurance. It's a managed Medicaid product, and he wasn't getting checked on, right? So his blood pressure was out of control, and he developed a renal failure. So he came into the hospital. He's 560 pounds. Now he has a trach, which he's on a vent for, and he's also has renal failure now and needs dialysis. So we have to place him. But unfortunately, no nursing homes will take a patient who has a vent and is also on dialysis. So we couldn't place him. So we actually had to put him on a weight loss plan. And so he was in our he was in our hospital for close to 8 months while we had him lose 200 pounds. And then
you got paid a DRG.
Yeah, we got paid that little single DRG. So we got a few $1,000s probably for like $1 million stay. Yeah. So, and again, he had insurance and a managed Medicaid. The managed Medicaid plan is no risk whatsoever in that part, right? So it's all the risk is on the hospitals. Yeah. Wow. And you just hope those patients end up at your competitor hospital. Right? If you have too many of them, you'll go bankrupt. Yeah. But just imagine if you were able to follow that patient who has he does have a doctor, right? So if you were able to follow him through a telemed platform and prevent all that loss. And although that's like one story, there's like hundreds of thousands of those stories out there.
Yeah, that one story happens over and over and over.
Let me add to one of those stories. You know, I work a lot with the system in a very, very economically improvised area in Ohio, a system called Pharmaceuticals. Their patients have issues that are not, sort of things we're talking about. The issues are food insecurity. The issues are one of the, highest opioid crisis hit areas, right? So what they did is they opened a food pharmacy. Just think about that, how healthcare is changing. And a food pharmacy, if you can take care of food insecurity, that can make a huge impact on health outcomes. That's how healthcare is changing. A health system that is now physicians are prescribing food, not medicine. And that's sort of the part of the continuation of the story that Chris is talking about.
I think that a lot of these delivery challenges, and as someone that's on the innovation side of it, I'm very myopically focused to the drug side of it, and certainly there's a huge amount of potential innovation within delivery and making sure patients don't come back and they don't have a relapse from their congestive heart failure. I mean, there's a lot of technology. For me, and to influence my behavior correctly, it really comes down to policy. So the FDA and all the entities that are driving what I can get financed for have to behave properly to get me to behave. And the reason why I thought about that was because you mentioned the opioid crisis. I have a good friend that's trying to get a company started right now for a new opiate that doesn't have respiratory depression and doesn't have the AEs that GI. It's strictly pain, and it doesn't have the addictive and respiratory depression. So he's having trouble getting this financed because the newspapers are full of Sackler, court things, and so it's policy that's going to get those types of solutions moving forward. And I think he is a victim of just a dysfunctional macro environment that people aren't paying attention to the consequences of these policy and societal behavior. So you can't get the innovation that you need. That's just one example, but that gets played out a lot. So anyway, yeah.
I mean, obviously, this evolution in site of care is pretty fundamental to both my current business as well as the one I just left. For OneOncology, it's a little known fact that about 98% of cancers can be treated outside of an academic or institutional setting today, which is a testament to the advances in the technology that has become accessible in these community settings, where they become smaller, they become more accessible, they're more affordable, and patients can now have access to that care in a way that they maybe either didn't have at all or had to travel great distances for in order to receive. I just left CVS Health, and some of you might have followed the transaction that they've engaged in recently in the combination with Aetna Health. And while there are a lot of different beliefs around why that transaction took place, I was fairly involved in that transaction, and I will tell you that over the long term, the idea is to transform the way that consumers access healthcare and to insert yourself in the life flow of a patient. So for any of you who work in a clinical setting, you know that you can't do anything in the clinical setting unless it's in the clinical workflow. If you require a doctor or anyone in the doctor's practice to step out of the workflow, it ain't going to happen. Well, the same is true in changing patient or consumer behavior. You can't ask a consumer to step out of their daily lives and invest in managing their health. It has to be in their daily life flow, kind of the equivalent of a workflow. You have to meet them where they are. Well, CVS Health has 5 million people walking through their stores every day. And that number is probably going to get about 6 million this year. It's an incredible part of many people's lives. And they believe that that position in a patient's life flow can be the basis upon which you can transform and bring healthcare to that patient. So you'll see there's a long process that started with discontinuing the sale of tobacco. Not only was that $2 billion in revenue, by the way, but it was it was worth it.
They switched to alcohol, though, right?
No, alcohol was always there. Alcohol's in about 10% of the stores, and most of those were acquired, and that'll probably go away over time. But you know,
Texas.
Is that right? Yeah.
That's the secret of 24/7 CVS.
Yeah. Well, you got to balance things out. There's a process, but what it did do is free up real estate. And real estate's really, by real estate I mean square footage inside a store. You used to have behind the counter, you used to have a wall full of tobacco. Now it's open. What else don't you do at CVS anymore? Anyone bring their film in to get developed? No. The film departments are essentially enormous square footage. Anyone go and buy magazines at CVS anymore? Your magazine department going about this big? Huh?
My wife does.
Yeah. You may need to go to Walgreens because they're going to go away by the end of this year. But in their place, they're putting optometry, dental, care management, disease management applications. Why? Because that's where people's lives. Now that's a big capital lift and it's a big execution lift. The jury is out whether that will ever happen. But the belief that bringing in Aetna's, a lot of people, they want to be in the health plan business. They want to be in the health plan business. No, what they really wanted was Aetna's data, Aetna's connectivity to the clinical or medical delivery system, Aetna's insurance and underwriting capabilities, which CVS doesn't have very much of, and some of Aetna's health services capabilities. They acquired a number of health services businesses over the years. That was the real attraction to that asset. We'll see, but that whole evolution inside of care is driving even my little company like me to something as large as CVS Aetna.
Before I turn it over to Q&A, because I'm sure folks have questions, I did want to talk about technology, which, is a huge area. And there are so many different things we could tackle, but something that people are really curious about is this influence of the introduction of the non-traditionals, as we call them in healthcare, meaning Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and what impact they may or may not have on the future of healthcare. Would love to hear any thoughts you have on any of those.
So I can start this because I can tell you with certainty that Amazon has had a meaningful impact on the CVS environment. It has a meaningful impact on the front of the store, right? Where the non-pharmaceutical, their acquisition of PillPack will have a meaningful impact on mail order distribution. There's a long lift to go there as well. They're the one I would be most concerned about if I were in their way, because they seem to be very thoughtful about how they're approaching this. They've got all the advantages and general lack of requirement to make money for a while, which most of us can't get away with. So that would be interesting. The others have been in and out in varying degrees, and it's really hard to tell where they'll go and what they'll do. It's so tempting to any company. I mean, we've been around healthcare for so long. This is 18. I mean, it's one of the largest sectors in the world economy. It is intimate to people's lives, so it is not something that's sort of esoteric to you. It's in your daily thinking, and it's fragmented, broken, and expensive. It's just begging for innovation. And outsiders from outside healthcare look at it and go, "Oh, there must be a bunch of yo-yos that have been running that for decades. We'll just bring our really smart people in and fix it." And not many of them have been terribly successful. So there are challenges in this convoluted industry, and it'll be interesting to see how they navigate. Amazon has shown.
Did anybody see the blurb over the news today about Alexa, what's my blood sugar?
Yeah.
Yeah, so wearables, implantables, all of that stuff is just sort of getting into the mix, and I don't know how it's going to. What are the resistance points, or what are the issues? I haven't really.
Remote sensing and monitoring, I think, will be the end of big. Particularly in your day.
Yeah, and particularly if you think about, as people think about more healthcare where you live is your home, this will have an enormous impact. I'll tell you one thing is, I go to World Economic Forum every year, doing so for years. I see enormous Google presence. I mean, I don't know exactly what they're doing, but the amount of effort, money, and people they're putting in healthcare, that's of the big tech companies I see the biggest presence. Obviously, Alexa, we are in conversation with Amazon about a lot of things that you talked about, but I see Google is putting a lot of effort. I don't know which way, you guys probably know better than I do which way it's going, but they're very focused on it. Very, very focused on it.
It is still a little bit nebulous, but I think the personal health is one of the areas that they're really going to innovate. I still practice emergency medicine, so it's hugely helpful when someone comes in with an iWatch and say, "Hey, my pulse was up 160," and then I can actually see that it was tracking that high. And, they're probably having an arrhythmia, need to be further worked up, or that's what happened when they passed out. Super, super helpful. So I think they will innovate more along that end. The other thing is the electronic health records, still really cumbersome. And if you've been reading any recent article, I think there was one in Fortune recently about how much time is wasted by the clinicians. It's like 2 hours a day. So if someone could innovate that user experience, because we really don't, it feels like I'm working with like an MS-DOS program from 1988. when I'm doing my records. So if someone could innovate
What system
that.
are you on? Are you on Epic?
We're on Cerner.
On
So it's,
Cerner.
yeah, Epic and Cerner are the two biggest. They really kind of have almost a monopoly. Their systems don't talk with each other. So if someone could innovate some way for them to even talk to each other, that would help. But again, that user experience for all the clinicians, because it's doctors, nurses, techs, every single person that touches the electronic medical record just dreads it.
Yeah, I don't know how the Google or the Amazon or any of these companies do this on their own. They have to integrate with Medtronic and all the companies that know how to interface with the patient electronically. This is not going to happen. This is not going to be silent. They might be able to handle the information or access to it, but they're going to have to interface with the companies that understand the devices.
Yeah, and that's why Cerner and Epic have such a kind of this like trade secret almost, because they're integrating with over 100 systems in the hospital that are able to talk to them. So it's very hard to replicate that, because it kind of grew like a fungus over years about how all the different records are in the hospital. So in the hospital and acute care setting.
I would just say one thing is we all know this in this room. Whatever these technology companies do, I hope some of them focus on making our physicians' life better. There's a huge burnout rate in physicians. I'm sort of one of those typical Indian family where everybody's a doctor. I'm not. I just see that.
You're the black sheep of the family.
Exactly. The amount of burnout in physicians is crazy. And if we can attract physicians to do what they do, we have a huge problem. So these technology companies can make that process much better. And the complaint is not I got 2 shifts in a row. The complaint is I got to type up so much shit that I just didn't sign up for. You know what I mean? So that's sort of the biggest complaint I hear from my friends.
I hear it every day.
And so if there is a lot of you are innovators, value creators, there has to be tremendous amount of value sitting right there. If we can make our physicians' life better, because otherwise we're going to have a big problem.
And I'm excited about seeing companies work together more, because that's also happened. As you see, these big companies are saying we're going to look like they're going to start their own health insurance, for example. Even the hospital systems are doing that. So we were getting killed by all this generic pricing. I think remember when Mylan raised the EpiPen to like $600, and all of a sudden my cheap antibiotics, they raised those by like $30. But if you add that per patient, it's horrible. So even more, Hermann band together with 12 other big hospital systems, including NYU. We just formed our own generic drug company. So we're not going to have to go out and price or be victim to the generic pricing. We're just going to say, this is costing us all a lot of money. We're going to make it ourselves. So Civica RX is out of Utah. So we just started, and we're looking at what we need to do to keep costs down. It's not for profit. It's really just to help the system run better.
Well, in 5 years, you'll give us the update. So I know that there must be questions. Okay. Why don't you say who you are, what class you are?
Julie Hussein, class of 09, my classmates. I'm going to have to apologize because I have to run out in 2 minutes to relieve the babysitter, but I'm just wondering if you
just use AI.
They're fine. I was wondering if you see any innovation in the preventative healthcare space, something that a friend and I are interested in, considering is, how do you help those folks who are going through some serious health concerns that traditional medicine may or may not be addressing really well? How do you maybe pair Western medicine with scientifically proven alternatives? Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, for people who are dealing with chronic pain, things like that. Just more about preventative. So maybe even tackling obesity, because it's related to so many things, whether it's cancer or heart failure, things like that.
So the question is, how do you deal with, or how do you
incent
prevention in prevention?
Anyone want to start?
I'm sorry to say this, but it's not very profitable.
Exactly. That's
And
exactly what I was
no one's
going to pay you.
This isn't something that a venture capitalist is getting excited about.
Right.
There's just not a lot of money in prevention.
Just because it may add value, doesn't mean, if there is no way to get paid, somebody's got to get paid for the money to go.
The one exception I would say, and it's kind of where you were on, is as you see a shift in risk in the reimbursement model to a population ascribed risk, there will be an incentive on those at risk to prevent the number of people in that population that have that illness. And there you may see an economic incentive aligned with the right thing, and you could see activity there.
So you think that sort of consumers will pay for it, or sort of as the people who are responsible for population
Right, so
health?
yeah, exactly. As it goes more value-based. So right now, we actually hired a CEO, Ben Chu, to bring in population health to our system. This was a few years ago. When Trump got elected, Ben Chu got fired because we're still actually 97% fee for service, and we're only 3% at risk. So we thought that everything was going to go to this value play. We're going to have accountable lives, and that's where we're going to focus on prevention more. But when that changed, when we realized we're still going to be in a fee-for-service world, we just really focused on providing the most evidence-based, cost-efficient care. The preventative stuff, it's still left to the primary care offices. So we're trying to build a huge primary care network and make sure that patients are followed. Make it some of the health plans are making it requirements, obviously, saying you have to come in for your checkups.
We'll get into the weeds a little bit here, but unfortunately, a lot of the value-based models today begin with a diagnosis. I mean, go back to the original DRG, right? You're diagnosed with something. So in oncology, it's called the oncology care model. It's something that CMS runs for its Medicare patients, we enter the model of risk upon diagnosis and their first episode of chemotherapy. So we're well past prevention, right? So it's when the risk models move forward, and you have that whole population ascribed to your risk pool, that's when you'll see the activity improvement.
We're working with those populations
Good.
that traditional things aren't helping as much, and seeing what else we can do to coach them through the process.
Thanks.
So you said something. I was going to put three of you said things that came together in a similar vein. You had mentioned COPD and congestive heart disease, and then and then you mentioned the last 4 years of life are the most expensive. But then unfortunately you made the point that innovation is very narrow and not going for diseases that are broad-based across the population, which sounds like a little bit, unfortunately, like the answer you just gave about preventative, which is where actually the investments aren't going into things that are actually going to help the health care system. Is that, am I adding 2 and 2 and getting 5?
No, I think
it's a problematic conclusion.
If I was going to present a business plan for something that's going to require a 5,000 patient or 10,000 patient clinical trial, a startup's not going to get funded to do that. They're going to get funded, they really get funded when they can have a 20 patient study that says it's going to really work, and then Pfizer's going to buy it. So that's where most of the money's churning around.
Sorry, I'm just, it's sort of a quantity versus quality. There are plenty of people that would benefit and purchase those drugs of COPD and who have COPD and heart disease. Right? So that's why it's a little confusing.
Yeah, I think it is still happening by the big companies though. So for example, like Novartis, they came out with a new medication for congestive heart failure called Entresto in 2015. It's pretty expensive. It's about maybe $5,000 a year. But as a health system, we decided that every patient that comes in with congestive heart failure, we need to start them on Entresto. Whether it's, we have our own health plan as well, because it's shown that it increases their quality of their life, and also it decreases them coming back into the hospital. So, although I think obviously we come from all different backgrounds, and again, with developing a drug, it's easier to get funding for kind of the rare diseases. Those are important also, because it's really going to change the lives of those individuals.
Right.
I get that.
I agree. I think they're both are right, so I don't think you're.
But little guys can't do that. That's
right. No, but so you're right. I mean, if you're looking to get the highest return on capital, you want something that has a narrow scope and a easily influenceable niche that you can deploy and move share to and get an immediate return. That's why people love oncology. That's why it's so much oncology, because it's you know, you can find a single cell, you know, tumor that you can treat with a single drug, and you can get doctors to move to that drug and move share and get an immediate massive return. However, look at hepatitis C. I mean, we haven't developed a drug that has been curative in a long time. You guys might know the answer to it, but it's a long time. But they did.
Yeah.
They cured hepatitis C, and when it came out, it was what, 85,000, and then you know the AbbVie came out with a product 6 months later. They owned the market for 6 months. They had to try to get their return back, and the price reduced, at least ours did, by 2/3. Right? Still an expensive drug. All kinds of issues with a health plan, for example, that used to pay $30,000 a year for a patient, right? And they only held their patient for 2.5 years. Well, now they're going to pay $120,000 in one shot. It actually costs them more, right? Because typically a health plan member moves every couple of years, and so they end up not actually paying more. But it was the right thing to do. They got the cost down. We cured it. So that was a big, massive population that was curative. So I think there's all's not lost. I think there's still.
I have to be careful. I overstated it. I was a little bit extreme in my statement, but I think you get the point. Yeah.
But your fundamental question is right. You know, think about, at the end of the day, it's a question of incentives, right? So it's a policy question. And as healthcare is changing, as the society is changing, the policies need to reflect. Policy needs to change to reflect that. I will tell you a very simple example of what I'm trying to do. You know, innovations are happening everywhere, not just science innovation, delivery innovation everywhere. You know, our business used to be traditionally is a business for 1%, top 1%. And we're trying to think, how do we get this business to sort of the person who has been a teacher or a policeman or a fireman, right? Or in majority of the cases, women, because women tend to live a lot longer than men. How do we do that? And we're trying to create a business model with the payers, which sort of has a vested interest so that their Medicare, you know, sort of population doesn't go back to the example that Chris gave, right? Once you are at risk, right? How do you prevent this person to have 2 bags of Cheetos and 3 bottles of Coke? So that's sort of the question. So we're trying to innovate around that. I don't know whether it will be successful or not, but we can. This is not a question of morality. It's a question of policy, and it's a question. At the end of the day, it's a question of incentives.
Is there something wrong with Cheetos? Are you?
In moderation.
Okay.
Sir?
I spent a bunch of years in the PBM industry and watched a couple of years back, and watched as the industry morphed, and you had PBMs buying, PBMs buying health plans, and health plans buying pharma, and all different permutations, and there was consolidation, but didn't really last, and then everybody divested eventually, or many of them did. But now we're seeing a lot of that taking place again, with the Cigna acquisition we talked about, and Aetna, of course, with CVS, and all the lives being managed more, in a more aggregated fashion. Do you see that as a defensive play just against an Amazon? Do you see that maybe as a trend towards what could be maybe a single payer model that could work down the future when lives are managed collectively better?
Yeah.
Better data.
You're spot on, and I think it's a little bit of all the above. So the benchmark, in so many ways, I've worked there a long time, but it's United Health Group. United Health Group has a vision to be the largest private healthcare system in the world. It measures the highest quality, the best outputs. Now, you may have varying points of view on that, but it is the model for that. And it set that standard when it internalized PBM and pharmacy some time ago. It developed a separate entity, Optum, which has meaningful scale that many companies are envious of. They're envious of it in the health plan space for a number of reasons. Let's set aside CVS Aetna, because that was kind of a reverse combination, and we talked about that earlier, had a little bit different characteristics. But for a Anthem, which will someday own its own, for Centene, which owns its own and will continue to build its own, and Cigna Express Scripts, all of those have a similar idea, which is having a separate, unregulated entity has a lot of value, A, for my multiple, because I can balance against, when there's risk cycles on the insurance business, if I have an unregulated services side, I always have this diversity play I can make and it's worked for United, right? Second, you can move revenue around in a way that advantages you from a tax and MLR standpoint, right? So you can move costs in and out. So if you're familiar with the medical loss ratio requirements under the ACA, you can do some stuff back and forth less than you used to be able to. But no one really takes that entity seriously unless it has scale. How do you get scale really fast in our industry? You buy businesses with big fat revenue. What businesses have big fat revenue? Anything involving pharmacy. In the health plan space, it's PBMs. So all of a sudden, Cigna has a huge healthcare services business. It's primarily their PBM. Even for Optum, 73% of their revenue is from Optum RX. So I have to be careful. My biggest critic, my wife, works at Optum. She's right here. So she's staring at me with her laser eyes. It was everything? It was everything? Right. Okay. I'll hear about it later if I wasn't. But and that wasn't, the whole thing about United wasn't just to make sure I got good vibes. But that's a lot of what's kind of going on there. And there's this vision to be both vertically and horizontally integrated in a way that can take advantage of whichever way the health market grows.
All of you folks that are in the trenches of delivering care and all of the components of the system that aren't adding value, I would encourage you to figure out how to get rid of the waste, because we're all going to get sick, we're all going to get a disease, we're going to have a treatment that's not going to be as good as we want. It's going to have side effects. It's not going to work. We're going to die faster than we think. We want the innovators to be as motivated and as incentivized to keep innovating and squeeze as much of the noise out of the system. Don't let the generic drug makers keep raping the system in terms of the way they introduce competitors. There's a lot of waste in the system. So as a person in society, I want new drugs that are better than they are now.
Hallelujah, brother.
Yeah.
All right, well, on that happy note, I see that it's after 5, so we have to wrap things up, unfortunately. I think we could go for another hour, sorry. And I want to thank all of you for participating, and thanks all for coming.